Welcome, everyone. Welcome at the lecture of Jonathan Burrows. Um, Normally, I would give a short introduction, but we decided that I won't go into the history of Jonathan, since this is already part of the lecture, and we believe that Jonathan's memory might be a bit more accurate than mine if it comes to his own life. So I will say something about the context of this lecture, which was initially part of a bigger collaboration between Drama at KASK and Jonathan Burrows, since he would give a workshop for the masters together with composer Matteo Farjon. In this workshop, they would focus on dramaturgic and choreographic processes in drama. And for known reasons, this workshop couldn't take place now, but we are happy to invite Jonathan and Matteo on a later moment for this workshop. So this is all from me now. I will be back after the lecture to moderate the questions that you might have. So if you have questions and you join us on Zoom, you can write down your questions in the Q&A section, and you can just do this all the time. If you're watching this lecture on Facebook or YouTube, you can write down your questions in the comment section, and I will get them as well. So on Zoom, it's a Q&A section, and the rest is just as a comment. Um, so now it's up to our guest of tonight, Jonathan Burrows. Please be welcome.
Thanks, Goddard. That's great. It's lovely to see so many people here, and thank you for joining me. I'm going to share my screen because I will be sharing a keynote presentation, but I'll be talking over the top of it. But I'm sorry, you have to see my desktop for a moment, and then we'll be into it. There we go. So, yes, welcome to this short thinking about choreography, which I'm going to share with you. Goddard mentioned that I was going to introduce myself, and I think that might be helpful just briefly. Um, that I am a choreographer and a performer, and my history is unusual in that for the first part of my career, I was a ballet dancer. I was a soloist with the Royal Ballet in London, and for quite a long time, for 13 years. Um, so I experienced at that time a very conventional theatre and a very codified dance form of classical ballet. Um, and this is very far from the work that I've made for the last 20 years or longer. Um, but at the same time, as I was a ballet dancer, I began performing as a dancer for a choreographer called Rosemary Butcher. Um, she sadly died a short number of years ago, but she was perhaps the most important experimental choreographer in the UK in the last 30 years. And I met and began working with her in some way by accident. But through her, more than anybody else, I became very immersed in more experimental practices. And I would just add that from her, I learned something about choreography, which still resonates through what I try to make, which is that in the work of Rosemary Butcher, there was a sense that um, choreography was about a process and long practice of embodying movement possibilities, in a sense, until they were worn away and became a trace of a feeling or a sense made more powerful by this long process. It was almost as though the materials had been buried and left underground for hundreds of years and then dug up again. Um, and in a way, this is a picture of embodiment itself. So it was through Rosemary Butcher that I entered a very different perspective on choreography. Um, what I'm going to share with you this evening, I've called This, Then That. I have to confess and apologize that I somewhat stole this title from the Croatian visual artist Vlatka Horvat, whose work I love, and in particular her long durational performance with chairs, which is called This Here and That There. And I just couldn't help myself, because this here and that there, or this then that, is, for me, that is what choreography is about. It's about a transformation from one moment to the next moment. I, I wrote this short presentation. It takes about half an hour or something, um, for some work that I do with the hip hop artist John Z. We have been working with hip hop artists and crews and choreographers who are interested in making a transition to the space of a theatre. And it was about 3 years ago or 4 years ago that, because I hugely respect the very particular philosophy and intellectual ground of hip hop dance practice. Um, um, I wanted to come up with something that would speak very simply and directly to some bare bones of choreography and performance and theatre making, um, that could stand as something that one of the artists, the hip hop artists in the room with Johnsy and I, could take or leave according to what was useful in relation to their own deep embodied practice. But then I started sharing this with other people, and it seemed to resonate in some way. So I'm going to risk, with your permission, to share it with you. So this is how it began. Why talk about composition? So, I mean, when I say why talk about composition, what I mean is that there is nothing for a human being to learn about composition, because it's what human beings do all the time, make decisions about what goes where, when. And we're also full of embodied information from all the music we heard, all the films we watched, all the performances we saw or took part in, and so forth. So we understand anyway what composition is. So why to talk about it? So to figure out what's already spontaneously there, so you can go further. Meaning the problem is not when you start making work. The problem is, well, not the problem. The pleasure is in thinking, how do I sustain this work if it matters to me? I mean, anybody that makes work, I like the idea that they feel permission to go on making work. There you go. So you can go on making things, and they're not all the same thing. Now I look at this again a few years on. I don't really agree with this. I quite like the idea of somebody making the same, going on making the same thing. I think we're moving into a more ecological notion of performance, away from the kind of late capitalist obsession with new things. But still, there's a pleasure in finding the new when you're working. So maybe it's that, and composition gives you some tools. okay, this is for dance people specifically, because if you put dance in a theatre, the audience can't walk away. So you have to take responsibility for their time. I mean, what I mean is that it's not so true of theatre, and I'm sure many of you listening are theatre practitioners, but dance is a participatory event. I don't want to watch you dance. I want to dance with you. So when you ask me to watch you, it's an odd situation, and you're responsible for that question and for asking me to take that time. Because dancing for 2 minutes is easy, but dancing for 20 minutes is more difficult. That's wrongly worded. It should say because watching dancing for 2 minutes is easy to enter into, but after a while you think, well, why am I still here watching this person dance? I'd rather get up and join in. But it's a strange art form, contemporary dance, or any dance really, because most of the time it doesn't work, but when it works, for me, it works against the odds, and something extraordinary happens. Why do you want to make a performance? Don't make a performance to become famous or popular. It probably won't work. Well, I think this is more and more true, but it's also, it's a bit of a humorous provocation to, yeah, that it's to do with how do we validate this thing that we do. It's not about us. It shouldn't be about us. Don't make a performance to teach us something. We already know a lot. It's something to do with respect for the spectator. I'm more often a member of the audience than I am a performer. I'm a fan of theatre and dance performance, and I sit there and I have my history with me. So if you make a performance to ask a question, then we're more likely to be interested and stick around to find out what you discovered. I think questioning is the heart of it, and I come back to a kind of dictum from the English artist and theatre maker Tim Etchells from Forced Entertainment Theatre Company, and he says we raise the problem to the level of the subject. We raise the problem to the level of the subject. So the problem being the thing, that the question, the doubt, the things that are concerning you. That's where to start and raise that to the level of the subject. What about dancing? I don't know how much this dancing bit will resonate with somebody making theatre, but it's not uninteresting because it's part of the theatre landscape, especially in Belgium. You already know how to dance, otherwise you wouldn't be here. And anyway, most people know how to dance. Well, okay, so yeah. I mean, that's very odd, isn't it? I mean, you can train certain skills, and I've certainly seen extraordinary dancers with extraordinary skills, but I've spent many years in dub reggae dances, and some of my favorite dancers are the people I dance with there, and they're not calling themselves trained. Most people know how to dance and they like to do it, but that doesn't mean they want to watch you do it, so you better give them a good reason to pay attention. That's what I said before. It's just worth remembering. Watching skillful dancing and technical virtuosity is quite interesting, but it gets quickly exhausted, so you're going to want to drop the skill in at the right moment, at the right time, in the right place. This was a little bit specific for the hip hop dancers that I was working with, because their virtuosic, spectacular skill was off the scale. and yet there was this strange phenomenon that generation after generation that John Z. Day and I were working with would discover, that if you in a battle, I don't know if you've ever been to I don't know if they're still there, the b-boy battles at Kai Theatre, which in Brussels, which were just beautiful. And um, you know, you don't make the big moves all the time. You know, you hold them back, and sometimes you can really bring everything down to something small. So this was to do with technical virtuosity. What about the dancer? This is to do with this strange choreography is problematic because it has always proposed a choreographer who is separate from the dancer, and a choreography which is separate from the dancing. I think this is changing. I think it's one of the things that's happening, that the dancer is more and more recognized as an agent of their own artistic practice. And the choreographer is more and more recognized as somebody that is often part of a collective of people arriving at the necessary decisions. We don't need any big name. We don't need more big names. It's much more interesting, a community of practice. In the moments of dancing, the dancer knows everything. The last time I shared this, I realized that what I was meaning was that I think I feel that. I think when I dance, I feel wise. And that's very interesting. It's to do with embodied knowledge, but it's not, you can't evidence it. But it's very interesting. It's what makes people dance. And anyway, this was addressed to the choreographer, the person that declares as a choreographer. I mean that to trust the dancer. What about feelings? So this was to do with the fact that if you think about composition, people they think it's something structural. Choreography is structural. I don't think it's structural. I think it's a feeling. So you're a human being, so feelings are a given, but what you might need is a good place to put them so we notice them. So I mean, that's what choreography is. Putting feelings in the right place so that the people sitting with you, watching, listening, can share them. The audience also have feelings, but you shouldn't take them for granted because they're theirs and you can't control them. You can only give them a good place to put them so they might notice them. I like this idea that you give the public somewhere to put their feelings. Some principles of composition. This is the kind of nuts and bolts bit. This is the under the bonnet of the car bit. You can look away if it feels inauthentic, but it's another route to feeling something. Changes. When something changes from one thing to another thing, we pay attention. Well, it's not such a great change, but something happened. The letters became red. Every change from one thing to another thing is new information. What's really interesting here, and I've noticed it more and more, is that it's not interesting when the letters turn red. It's interesting when they turn back to black. I can't figure out what that is. It's to do with memory. I'm back on track. I'm where I was. The strongest meaning happens in the change between one thing and the next thing. So this is the idea that choreography is transition between moments. It's not about the moment. How something changes from one thing to the next thing is sometimes more important than the thing itself. I mean, that was a cheap trick, but I'm gonna stick with it. It's at the moment it's just a bit of material, but we're accumulating something. Work on the changes and the rest will follow. I was looking at watching some of the students from Parts dance online yesterday, Parts in Brussels, and I gave them the idea that while they were moving, they should only think of the feeling of one thing transforming into another, and it was really beautiful what happened. That would be great with a theatre piece. Just don't do it for the material, do it for the feeling of the transformation of one material to another. Expectation. The person watching is remembering what happened before. So now what am I doing? I'm just acknowledging the history. This is a memory of the previous red writing. It does something else. It says if there was red writing before and there's red writing now, there's now a future. Yeah, there we go. What will happen next? The person watching likes to be surprised by what's happening. This is the best surprise I could come up with. It's just change, but the change is information. It's not yet meaning. It's accumulating to become meaning. Things that are unpredictable must be both unpredictable and unpredictable. This was a dictum that I got from the composer Kevin Volans, who I studied classical music composition with. It just means that when things are constantly unpredictable, they have one quality. Constantly unpredictable things are predictable. So to make them unpredictable again, you have to be predictable for a bit. You can't work thinking about this. You might just notice it in your work. The color blue was a surprise, but at the same time you accepted it because it already started with the red. I didn't notice it because the red was already there when it came in. So there's now a continuity of color as well as writing. Now it seems like we can go anywhere. But we won't, not just yet. Later we might see if we can go a bit further together. I'm just holding time now because it was moving rapidly, and it gives everyone a rest. Things that are predictable must be both predictable and unpredictable. Predictable things get more interesting if we think they might change. Not only must things change, but the rate at which they change should also change. It just means do something for a long time. Oh, other way around. Do something for a short time, then the next thing you can do for a very long time. Pina Bausch was remarkable at this. Long periods of repeating activity, then one astonishing image, very short, 15 seconds. Repetition. Repetition amplifies feelings. It's not just mechanical. It's not just numbers. And anyway, numbers are a feeling. Numbers are a sense. Repetition exhausts feelings. Forced entertainment, theatre company, doing things over and over again until you can't feel anything anymore. Repetition creates rhythm. That's a beat. That's a heartbeat. Repetition helps us remember because it just does it again. Like that. Repetition helps us forget. 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 I anticipated that one. Oh, there we go. I've done it a few times, so I don't know how many of those there are, but I start to embody it. So counterpoint. Human beings are good at watching more than one thing happening at the same time. Everything happening on a stage is connected. Human everything being happening on good. I can't read the letter. the word at stage watching is connected more than one thing happening at the same time. It just to mean this is just meant to say it doesn't take you long to figure this out. Counterpoint is about building friction between things. I don't think this anymore. I think it's about transformation. But it's not bad, the friction thing. It's there in language. It's how language works. It's how poetry works. It's the rhythm of poetry. One thing bouncing from another thing. And so information builds through change, accumulates because you recognize the change in each transformation, and that is a friction. And the friction between things can be simultaneous, or it can be one thing after the other. It can be horizontal or it can be linear. And performance is great because performance is the one place where we can do this horizontal accumulation of information and meaning, so that something that happens later can completely alter what has come before. Trying to think of an obvious example of that. I can think of it the other way round. At the beginning of Pina Bausch's Palermo, Palermo, there's a huge wall made of breeze blocks that fills the entire entrance of the proscenium arch, and after a minute or so stillness and silence, it collapses, and this calamitous event informs everything that happens afterwards. Now that's not bad. I'd forgotten. So this changes everything that came before, because you don't know what it is. Is it a trick? Why this picture? What does it mean? What's it got to do with what he's talking about? So now there's a partial explanation. The boy's head is bandaged because he banged it on this doorway. We don't know why, but the information is a little bit richer. But also the fact that a second picture came means it's possible for more drawings to come. I don't think there are any more, actually, but it would be possible. So once you've got the continuity right, then you can take the audience anywhere and it will seem to make sense. The composer Kevin Volans, that I spent time thinking about composition with, he had a beautiful and useful idea that whatever's going to happen in the performance, it's really lovely for the audience if you share it with them quickly, and you can then come back to it. So the extreme example is, for 20 years I've followed the biggest heavyweight dub sound system in London. It's run by a man called Josh Shaka. And I've seen him he has many performative tricks within the long duration of the nights that he runs. And he's done this one a few times where he has what's called a dub plate. So it's a new music that we haven't heard. And we've been, I'm there with a lot of people I've been there for 20 years with. Some of them have been there for 40 years, 30, 40 years. And he'll put on this new music, and after 30 seconds, he'll immediately take it off. And then he doesn't play it for another hour and a half or 2 hours. But when it comes back on, it's already in the room, and it's new, but it's not new. And there's a recognition and a memory. There's an extreme example of it. But the ending is just where you ended up before you stopped. There can't be an ending that sums up everything that happened, because everything that happened took the duration of the performance to happen. So that's interesting. The memory returns with the flash of the red that had been there before. The right ending is invisible and obvious and changes everything. No, it doesn't change everything. I don't know why I wrote that, but it certainly can be invisible and obvious. So that was my illustration of an ending. It is the ending. I've got one more slide, but I'll discuss with you. So we're more or less on half an hour, which is good. Gives us time to talk together. So the counting down made it evident that it was going to end, likely. So you were anticipating it. But then the flashes of red took us back to earlier in the event, or conversely brought the earlier moment into the end. And then actually something happened completely by accident then, which I really liked, which is the number 6, the number 6 got stuck. And I thought for a minute that it wasn't going to work. But obviously what happened is that as I was working on this, I've accidentally added too many seconds to the transition. But this was very nice. And I think I'm going to make it longer, because in the middle of the expectation that the thing was going to end, it stopped ending. And it became a little bit nerve-wracking for everybody. Oh, it's it's broken. And then after the flashes of red, we see again for a moment the doorway where the boy banged his head. So by repeating it, the information folds into this abstract game of memory and anticipation, but feeling also of memory and anticipation. And I think when it comes back, when the doorway with the crack in it, the hole in it, comes back, I feel like it's a joke. It's somehow, the image is, well, when you have to listen to this kind of lecture, you get a headache. So there's a kind of, there's an image which also makes sense, although the two drawings came from my friend Peter Rapp, who draws cartoons, and I just happened to have them on the computer. It was random. And of course, the last thing I did was to make sense. When you see the red curtain is theatre, old-fashioned theatre. And so the colour red and the play with the colour red then also makes a certain sense. So concrete meaning is there, but the concrete meaning is accumulated very slowly. And I just want to add one more thought, which is from the choreographer Mette Edvardsen, who is Norwegian, and she lived until very recently, for many, many years, in Brussels, and developed an extraordinary body of work there in the last 10 years. And she's writing a PhD, and I was very fortunate to spend time with her as part of a midterm assessment for the PhD at the National Academy of the Arts in Oslo. And she said something which has really changed everything for me. I can only paraphrase it, but she said something like she said the work is about the dust that accumulates through the working. The dust that accumulates, that is the work. And what she means, I believe, is that it's not about a big idea that you have to make a performance. It's about slow practice, slow process, slow embodiment. and recognizing what's around you already and accumulating that and letting it tell you that um, that this should go here and that should go there. And it connects to a statement by the Martinican poet and theorist Edouard Glissant, who, in his book The Poetics of Relation in 1990, um, said that there were no more lightning flashes of creativity. So no more. He means, I think, white male genius leaps. He was a black poet. Um, he said instead what we have is the accumulation of sediments. So it's Meta Edvardson's dust, but sediment is what falls to the bottom of a lake or a river. It's the dust in the water, the sand and grit. And what Edouard Glissant goes on to say is that that is in part about hearing the narratives of people who had been marginalized previously and whose narratives were not heard because they were seen as not central to the art historic timeline. And so he uses this word sediment both to mean history, felt history, but also as a provocation for where value might lie. And he says that the value lies there in what is often rejected. Where's my last slide? But yeah, the dust that accumulates is the work. The best pieces never quite end, but the sense that something is about to be resolved pulls you forwards and stays with you long after you've left the theatre. So the idea that I've seen many performances that have this quality. The performance says, in a moment, I will explain everything. In a moment, I will explain everything. And then you wait, and then in a moment, I will explain everything. And then you wait, and then it ends. And the next morning, you wake up and you're still feeling this process and this continuity of thought, and it resonates then. I'm going to leave you with that thought. I can't guarantee this will resonate. But thank you for listening, and I'd be really interested to hear any observations or critiques or objections or confusions.
Yeah, then maybe I will start. So thank you very much, Jonathan. I think it was very interesting and inspiring. And one of the questions I had is the moment you were talking about the audience or audiences, especially in the beginning of your lecture, you were discussing them a lot and also seeing yourself as audience. And then I was wondering if you start at a national ballet, then you work as a performer, then you're interested in hip hop, and now you're sitting here. And these are all the audience for which you are playing in a way. So I'm wondering who is the audience and in what way can you really be aware of them and work with them?
Well, I have two thoughts about that. Um, um, yeah, I mean, I have worked for 30 years with the composer Matteo Fargin, and we share all aspects of our work, um, including creating, performing, and administrating, and so forth. And we borrowed an image about relation to the people with us in the room from the performer and theatre maker Jan Ritzemer, somebody else who used to live in Brussels but now runs the Performing Arts Forum in northern France. And he would talk about we're under the same roof. we're all under the same roof. So um, it's a quite poetic image. It's like this: we're within the shelter of the same for this moment within the shelter of the same context. But I find it really helps me when I come on to a performance. I because of course the roof crosses the fourth wall, um, but then Matteo Farjan and I have another dictum, which is how the audience sit is how we should sit. So the first thing we do is to try to do what you would do in a conversation, which is quite spontaneously, naturally, to embody the tone of the other person, and not to push that. So if the audience laughs, you could laugh. If the audience sits very still, you should join them. You should sit very still. But I mean, contemporary dance is very tortured by the idea um, that there's a longing for a real audience, and a real audience are the people that don't normally like contemporary dance. So everybody is longing that they would make a performance that would attract the real audience, and I think this is completely absurd. The people I've danced with in dub reggae sound systems for decades, they're the ones that love it. They know as much as me. They recognize tunes. It's fine, the people who like it. And there
Hmm.
are always new people. But anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you for asking that.
Yeah, there is a question of Leah Vinette. Actually, there are two questions. The first one is choreography more than composition? And then the second is, do you have any tips for composing alone?
Yeah, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the difference is between choreography and composition. Um, but I think the closest I can get, I think there is a difference, and I think the closest that I can get is that choreography deals with traces and memory in space. It's not just this at this time; it's this here at this time. Um, and that sounds very simple, but it has very profound effect. I mean, of course, theatre is also dealing with that, but theatre has often has narrative or theme, and choreography is this much more horizontal accumulation of meaning, possible meaning. Um, but for working alone, I I don't know. I've gone to a phase. I don't know if it's interesting to share my experience, but I don't have any other. I've gotten to a phase recently that I don't want to sit at a laptop administrating myself every day. I want to actually practice something. So I tend to practice things for very short periods of time. So um, I like, I really find this very fruitful too. So I might practice drumming for 15 minutes, and then I might play English folk music, which I do very seriously for half an hour. And then I might read, and then I might do some writing that I'm involved in, and then I might answer an email, um, something like that. What you do is what comes back when you work and make, you know.
And then maybe to add to that, I think your presentation we can see this as a composition as well. But can we consider this a choreography?
It is, yeah. I did that deliberately, and um, because I thought then you feel the possibilities. You don't intellectualize them. I mean, it is intellectual at some level, but yeah, you're receiving it on other with other senses somehow.
Hmm. And then how is it for you? Because it's you performed it, so to say, a couple of times. How is this to, as every setting is different, like to the rhythm, for example, or how do you experience this as a performance in a way?
Yeah, I think same things again and again is the greatest pleasure of playing something or performing something, and that every time you return, um, you are different, and therefore it is different, and um, some things become richer, some things become exhausted, some things suddenly trigger a new perspective. And I mean this playing music as well, because the English folk music I play is it's almost premised upon constant returning again and again. And then the more embodied it is, the more you can, in a way, improvise what the possibilities of relation to the is to the person that you're playing with. So.
Mm.
Hi, Jonathan. You can't see me, but I'm here as well. And I thank you very much. Oh, I can actually start my video now. I'd like to thank you for a very rich lecture. I have a few questions as well. Godair asked me to chip in if I wanted. So I'd like to continue a little bit on that question on choreography and composition. I'm wondering also about what the border of the choreographic or of the composition is. You said in the beginning of your talk that we compose constantly. It's something that we do on a daily basis. Perhaps choreography is something that is the moment where we don't do that, but we start to do that deliberately, perhaps. I don't know, but I'm curious what it offers you to use the choreographic or the compositionary lens. I mean, do you look at it at different arts forms, for example, at different disciplines from that standpoint? Is that for you really the primary lens to understand artistic practice, or can you imagine that there are others? Is it the primary lens because you are a dancer and a choreographer, or is it more than that?
Yeah, it's my primary lens because I'm a dancer and a choreographer, and some of my favorite work operates in quite different ways and with very different methodologies. I don't I don't do what I do because I think it's the best way to do it. I do what I do because it's the only way I've found works for me and my temperament, my personality, and what I enjoy, and so forth. Um, I had I had to do some online teaching recently, so I asked a younger artist. She's a choreographer and she runs a space in Berlin. Her name is Marcella Guiche, and I think her work is extraordinary. Uh, and very different from what I do. But she'd been part of a workshop that I'd done, and I asked her, could she help me think about what online teaching might be, and she said something which has continued to resonate with me. Um, she was talking about how in all art forms, this moment of lockdown and inability to share what we do and being alone in our rooms and so forth has initiated a kind of deep reflection about why we all do these things that we do, and why they might matter or why they might not matter, or what we want to change about them. And Marcella Guiche said um, that she had people turning up at a Berlin space to briefly in September, the lockdown opened and people came to dance together or make different dance practices together. And she said, I understood then suddenly that they were coming because because everybody felt lost and confused. And just this moment of being together in a room offered the possibility to focus on something, to bring the focus to something, and not to be trying to encompass everything and be responsible and understand. everything. And I don't mean that as that. Therefore, these practices are an escape. But I thought this is I like this. I suppose it's a kind of mindfulness, but it's a mindfulness through doing rather than through um, arriving at something that is good or that you put a value on. It's the doing itself which gives it this possibility. And I think composition or choreography is just one of the ways to find this focus, to find this kind of moment of possibility, just to. But what Marcella Guiche said was, it's not just that I focus on my hand; it's about that I be precise.
Mm.
And she'd been working with people. She'd been working with somebody who was making fine furniture. I play folk music with a very virtuosic concertina player of this hexagonal box. His name is Will. He's just extraordinary precision and freedom of precision. So there's something about being precise. So I think the common image of dancing is to be wild. But I think we all experience these, even in a club situation, these moments of like, now I'm really doing this and I feel it very precisely. And now it's changed into that. I might jump in a moment, So I think for me, that's whatever the boundary of choreography is, it's about a space within which to find precise focus, and that this seems very human and humanly necessary.
I at the same time, somewhere, I think it's in Cheap Lecture, you repeat, I don't know if you repeat it, but at a certain moment, you say, Cheap Lecture is a lecture that is also performed in a performance setting, in a theatrical setting, and you, at a certain moment, you and Matteo are saying, we don't know what we are doing, but we're doing it anyway. So I'm at the same time quite intrigued by your answer that it's somehow offering you precision, and I think the importance of scoring in your practice seems to be part of that. While at the same time that performing also seems to open up a space for ignorance and for not knowing, and be very precise in the not knowing. I'm curious for that apparent contradiction, but perhaps it's just a paradox somehow.
No, I think so. If what I'm working with is the transformation from this moment to that moment, I can be I can look for precision in the transformation without knowing where it's going to transform, how it's going to transform. So it's a sensitivity to that. But I also love oh, this is a whole other talk, but I should say it because and I'll say it briefly. I'm currently involved in research on the relationship between action and perception. The old model was called the input-output model, which took the stance that we receive the world through our senses and we process it back out through action. Action is a kind of motoric afterthought, a mechanical thing. But what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, feel as gravity, understand as proprioception, and so forth, that this is the primary thing. But this is being flipped around in neuroscience, cognitive philosophy at the moment, now in the last 15 years, towards a model that says what you perceive is premised upon what you have already embodied. So the example is comes from the philosopher Al-Noawi, that if you have a rectangle, my understanding of the rectangle is not a single object felt as a single event. It's the memory of an embodied exploration, which includes the fact that if I feel those two corners, I can anticipate that corner. That every perception is part of a process, so that the way we receive the world is through what we have already received and what we might anticipate by that. There's one other aspect to it which comes from the anthropologist Tim Ingold, which is, or he has particularly spoken about it, which is the notion that if I have learned a tune, a melody, it's not a pattern in my brain. It's not a fixed pattern that I take off a shelf. I only remember it as I sing it. I can think to sing it and remember it, but it's still the same. It's still a process. It's not a structure. Tim Ingold says it's not a complex structure. It's a complex process in relation to a given environment. So this is beautiful because it feels to me that how choreography works, that what we have embodied as patterning is how we perceive the world. But that's, I've just started down this road and I'm not going to speak any more of it now. But...
I see a question coming in from Ties Kalker. I'm not really sure if I understand the question well enough, but maybe you understand it a bit better. And so the question is, you mentioned that you rather ask a question than to answer a question or teach something. Does this mean you try to avoid topics on which you have a strong conviction, or how do you deal with finding answers?
Yeah, mostly to avoid topics that I have a strong conviction. So because then I anticipate the outcome, and I don't really get there properly. I just So the best example for me, it came from the poet Seamus Heaney, Irish poet. I heard him in a talk with another poet called Dennis O'Driscoll 10 years ago or more, and he said, Dennis O'Driscoll said, "Why do you write poetry, Seamus?" And Seamus said, "I write poetry to arrive somewhere I could not reasonably have expected to arrive, but which I recognize when I get there." So it's not that he's not working with something that he feels strongly about. It's just that he's not anticipating what it is. He finds somewhere to begin, and the working takes him to what matters. And a lot of poets speak that way. That the work itself will tell you what matters and what you have conviction about. And I like this image.
It also reminds me a bit of what you said about the audience, that you want to be the audience as well. I think it's in a way, I can imagine it's in the same process of being surprised or being able to be surprised.
Yeah, funny enough, there's a second part to the Seamus Heaney story. So he won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and on the morning that he won the Nobel Prize for Literature, the BBC radio asked him, "So, Seamus Heaney, now you've won the Nobel Prize for Literature, isn't it going to be very difficult to keep on writing poetry?" And he said, "Well, the usual outcome of these endeavors is failure." So he didn't always get to the place that he recognized, right? And poets write a lot of poetry, but they only collect 20 of them together once every 5 years.
I think that's great. I think that's also maybe a very nice story to end this evening with, and to think about. And we look forward, of course, to see you in Ghent, to invite you here.
Yeah,
In person, because I think dancing together is probably more fun than dancing alone, as you already mentioned.
Yeah. Thank you, Godard and Frederick, and thank you for everybody that was that was listening. And yeah, take care.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you very much. And
Pleasure.
thanks to all the viewers and Frederik. And for the people who follow the KASK lectures, so next week we don't have one. And the 17th we have Bazim Mahdi also on Zoom. Jonathan, thank you very much. Bye.